Hello YouTube and welcome to the next route learning video and my first German route learning video. On today's journey we're going to be taking the Hamburg to Hanover route in an ICE2, driving all of the way from Hamburg to Hanover. On the way we will be calling at Harburg, Luneburg, Uelzen, Celle and finally Hanover. The total distance for this journey is 178 3/4 kilometres, so we're looking around 112 miles. The ICE2 was manufactured by Adtranz and Siemens and constructed between 1995 and 1997. A total of 46 ICE2s were built. There is a locomotive at one end, which is the other end of the train, which we will be driving from today. And at this end there is a DVT, I believe it may be known as a cab car in Germany, I'm not 100% sure. So we've got a powered loco at one end and an unpowered driving car at the other end. There are a total of 391 seats on the train. The maximum speed is 280 kilometers per hour, which is around 174 miles per hour. Though on today's journey we won't be able to go faster than 200 kilometers per hour, which is around 125 miles per hour. The total weight of the train is 412 tons, with a power output of 4,800 kilowatts. Once inside the cab of the ICE2, there's just a couple of things that we need to do. The first thing is to put the train into forward, the same with most trains. Now the train has been put into forward, the next thing I'm going to do is turn on the CIFA system, which is effectively a driver safety device or alerter. So if I zoom in here, you can see in front of me on the dashboard a light that says CIFA on it, a white light there. So as I press shift and enter, that will go out, indicating that I've turned the system on. And then when we're driving along, every 30 to 45 seconds the CIFA light will come on and it will stay on for 4 seconds. If by that point I haven't pressed numpad enter to cancel the CIFA system, we will then get an audible warning. If after the audible warning I still haven't cancelled it after a further 2.5 seconds, the emergency brakes will be applied. The next thing that I'm going to do is turn on the signalling system. There are actually two signalling systems simulated on this route. One is known as the PZB system, which is available on all German routes since the Munich to Augsburg route made for Train Simulator. And the second signalling system is the LZB system, which is only on certain routes and it's for higher speed sections for speed limits above 160 kilometers per hour. So to turn on the signalling system I need to press Control and then numpad enter. You'll now see that a light has illuminated saying 85 on the dashboard. The 85 indicates that we are a passenger train, so we're allowed to go at the highest permitted speeds. If we were a high-speed freight train, the number 70 would have illuminated instead, and that would give us different rules when approaching red signals. And if the number 55 was lit up, we would be a very slow, heavy freight train. In Train Simulator, these numbers are configured automatically, depending on how the scenario has been set up in the scenario editor, whereas in real life I believe you'd have to enter this manually. The final system which I need to activate before we can go is the AFB system. Now, when we're operating under PZB signalling, which we will be as we depart from Hamburg, this operates very much like cruise control. So I'm going to in a moment press Y, which will increase the red bug you can see on the outside of the speedometer. As the speed limit here is 40 kilometers per hour, I'm going to set that to 40, and then when we accelerate the train shouldn't go above that, and in fact should maintain us around 3 to 4 kilometers per hour below the speed we've set it to. When we're on the LZB system, the AFB system works completely differently, as will be demonstrated a little bit further in the journey. So now I'm pressing Y. AFB. And you can now see that the bug is pointing to the 40 km per hour limit, and you can also see in the digital display on the speedometer that we've set it to 40 km per hour. So now all of that's done, we're ready to depart. Now that it's time to depart Hamburg, the starting speed limit is 40 kilometers per hour, and we've got just under 12.5 kilometers to go to the next stop, which is Harburg. You'll notice that just as we started, the signalling system gave a beep, and now you can see the 85 and the 70 light illuminating alternately. This means that we're currently under restricted mode, which happens when you start off from a station very often. Restricted mode means we can't proceed above 45 kilometers per hour. However, because we can see that the next signal ahead is clear, I can press end, which is the release button, and that takes us out of monitored mode. So you can see the signal we just passed had a green and a yellow on it. That means that we're permitted to proceed at restricted speed of 40 kilometers per hour. The signal below that, with the two green lights in a diagonal position, is the distance signal, telling us that the next signal has a clear aspect, so we're clear to proceed. You can see now that the CEFA light has come on, and then you heard the CEFA audible warning come on. If you hear the word CEFA 3 times, you can be almost certain the emergency brakes will be applied. The speed limit here is going up to 60 kilometers per hour, and we can accelerate as we cross a river shortly. Now that we've crossed the river, I'm going to accelerate up to 60 kilometers per hour. The speed limit is now going up to 80 kilometers per hour, which is around 50 miles per hour. And we can accelerate just as we enter this sharp left-hand curve here. Once we reach the next overhead gantry, which is this one, we can now accelerate up to 80 kilometers per hour. I was originally going to produce an in-depth tutorial on the German signalling system before I made this route learning video. However, that's proved slightly more challenging than I originally expected. So I'm making this route learning video first, where I will go through some of the detail on the signalling system. And then hopefully next week at some point I'm going to try and put together a full comprehensive signalling tutorial demonstrating different signal aspects and different situations where you would face them and how you're supposed to respond to that. We will shortly have a signal warning us of a speed limit of 80 kilometers per hour. In Germany, signals themselves can have speed limits, and if you see a single number on a signal, times that number by 10, and that's the speed limit it's warning you for. So in this case, the distance signal is green and yellow, and you saw an 8 on it, which indicates that the next signal will have a speed restriction of 80 kilometers per hour. As we just passed that warning signal, I pressed the page down key, which is to acknowledge the signal alarm which you heard. At that point, the 85 lamp started illuminating, you can see in front of us, and below that a yellow lamp known as the 1000 Hertz lamp illuminated. This is indicating that we're in a monitored state, and the 1000 Hertz lamp is the first warning magnet when approaching a signal. So now at the signal coming up, because we had the warning, this is the signal with the 80 km per hour speed limit. Although the line speed has now gone up to 120 km per hour, we can't accelerate to that because the signal won't allow us to do so. I would also now like to apologise because I'm probably going to pronounce some of the place names on this route horribly wrong. If I do, I apologise. I'm going to try and put the names in captions on this route so that you can see the name of the place I'm trying to pronounce. So as we reach the girder bridge that we've just passed under, the speed limit went up to 120 km per hour, and the speed limit is very shortly going to be increasing further. You see this whiteboard just here we just passed, it had a 16 on it. That's indicating that we're permitted up to a speed of 160 kilometers per hour. So speed boards in Germany are small square boards with a white background and black writing on them. The number on the speed board is the speed limit you're supposed to travel at divided by 10. So for example, if the speed limit was 80 kilometers per hour, you would see an 8 on the board. If it's 160 kilometers per hour, you would see a 16 on the board, and so on. We're now passing Wilhelmsburg station on the left there. Now need to look out for a warning board for a speed reduction down to 100 kilometers per hour. Warning boards in Germany are triangular boards, much like in the UK, with the top of the triangle pointing downwards instead of upwards. And they've got an orange background, so there it is now, and you see a number 10 on the board, which indicates a speed reduction to 100 kilometers per hour. So I've now applied the brakes up to a step 4 brake application, which should bring our speed down about right. Now that we're at 100 kilometers per hour, I'm just going to reduce the speed set to that speed to ensure that we don't break the speed limit. The speed limit will go up again just before our stop, however from this point there's no point in accelerating any further, as we're now quite close to Harburg station. Now that I can see the large sweeping left-hand curve just ahead, I know that we're approaching Harburg, so I've applied the brakes to bring our speed off. Stopping point here, I'm going to try and stop 2 gantries after the rear of the signals we just passed on the right, so that will be at the next overhead gantry just coming up. And so here we are, arrival at Harburg. Departing from Harburg, the starting speed limit is 120 kilometers per hour, so I'm now going to increase the AFB system to that. And we've got just under 38 kilometers to go, so about 23 to 24 miles to go to the next stop, which is Luneburg. I think that may be how it's pronounced, I'm not sure. It could be Luneburg or Luneburg. Again, if you do know, then please do let me know in the comments. In a short distance time, we will be entering the LZB signalling system, which is completely different to the PZB system, as I will demonstrate. And then we'll be following the LZB signalling system almost all of the way to Hanover. We have now entered the LZB system. You can see immediately that we've now got a wire in the middle of the track. In addition to that, the 85 lamp has gone out and a blue light has lit up below the speedometer which says U on it. And this is the light that lights up when we're under the LZB system. I've now set the speed set to the maximum possible setting, as the train's computers will automatically adjust our speed based upon the speed limit. We're now passing through Meckelfeld station. So as I was saying, the train will automatically manage speed changes now. So when the speed limit goes up to 200 kilometers per hour, for example, then the speed set or AFB system will automatically increase to 200 kilometers per hour and the train will accelerate. When we're at that speed, if there's then a speed drop to 160 kilometers per hour, the train will recognise that and automatically brake for that speed limit. In fact, the only manual intervention that I need to do now is when we're stopping at stations, as the train won't bring us to a stop by itself. Also, if we encounter signal speed limits along this section of track, or we encountered a red signal, again the train would actually slow itself down to stop for that signal. We're now passing Maschen station on the left. Another system on the dashboard of the train which is only activated when we're under LZB signalling is in between the speedometer and the power and brake gauge. If you look here, you can see a series of yellow lines with a number at the top saying 5,400 and going down. This is actually a distance measuring equipment and it measures our distance from the next speed limit. So currently we're 4.7 kilometers, or we will be in a moment. We're now 4.7 kilometers from the next speed change. If the next speed change is over 9.9 kilometers away, then you won't actually see it on the distance measuring equipment. And then when it becomes less than 9.9 kilometers away, you will then hear a beep in the cab indicating that a speed limit has now appeared on the distance measuring system. We're now passing Celle station. For those of you more unfamiliar with kilometres from the UK and the USA, just to briefly explain, that 1 mile is approximately 1.6 kilometres. For every 5 miles is approximately 8 kilometres. So a speed limit of 40 kilometres per hour is around 25 miles per hour, 80 kilometres per hour around 50 miles per hour, and so on. We're now passing through Ashausen. As you can see, the speed limit has now just gone up to 200 kilometres per hour. The red bug around the outside of the speedometer has increased by itself, and the train is now accelerating to the new speed limit. However, the speed limits along here are very up, down, so the next speed reduction, which is back to 160 kilometres per hour, is less than 3 kilometres away. The beep that you've just heard with the red light, which just appeared on the dashboard in front of us, is indicating that there is shortly going to be a speed reduction, and that the train is aware of this, and now, as you can see, the train is slowing itself down for the 160 kilometre per hour speed limit. So we barely got up to 180 kilometres per hour there before we had to slow down again. Now that we're at 160 kilometres per hour, we're just around 3 kilometres from the next speed limit, which is an increase back up to 200 kilometres per hour. We're now passing through Winsen station. Once again, you can see the speed limit has just increased back up to 200 kilometres per hour, and the train is accelerating itself back up to that speed. However, we're just 3 kilometres away once again from a speed reduction back down to 160 kilometres per hour. Now the train is braking once again for the speed reduction back down to 160 kilometres per hour. The 160 kilometre per hour section along here now is only 1 kilometre long before the speed limit then goes back up to 200 kilometres per hour. The speed limit is once again 200 kilometres per hour. We're accelerating back up to that speed. We've got 7 kilometres to the next speed change, which is a speed reduction back down to 160 kilometres per hour. We're now passing Luneburg station, and we've got around 12 kilometres to go. train is now braking for the upcoming speed limit. We're now passing through Bardavik station. Speed limit will shortly be increasing once again to 200 kilometers per hour. However, we certainly won't be able to get up to that speed, as just after the 200 kilometer per hour limit, we're just 2 kilometers from a reduction back to 160 kilometers per hour. And then the speed limit continues to reduce further after that to 140 and then 110 kilometers per hour on our approach to Luneburg. Our train is now braking for the speed limits at Luneburg, and so we're now slowing down for the 110 km per hour speed limit coming up. Once we enter the 110 km per hour speed zone, we will then have just 1.6 kilometers to go, or around a mile to go, to our stop. So we've now entered the 110 km per hour speed zone, and I'm just going to idle the power now and allow the train to coast. For our braking point for the stop, I'm going to use it at a fence which will appear on the right very shortly, just after we pass these houses on the left. So you can see the fence has just appeared now. Now we're going past that. I'm going up to a step 4 brake application initially to bring our speed off, and I will brake harder if required. Coming in slightly too slowly now, so I'm just releasing the brakes to allow us to travel a little bit further up the platform. Our stopping point here is at the H board at the end of the platform. Departing Luneburg, the starting speed limit is 110 km per hour, though that is very shortly going up to 160 km per hour at the speed board you can see just here. And we've got around 35 km to go to the next stop, which is Uelzen. speed limit is now going up to 200 kilometers per hour. However, we're just 2.5 kilometers from the next speed limit, which is a speed reduction down to 140 kilometers per hour. So we certainly won't get up to 200 before we need to brake. Now entered the 140 kilometers per hour speed zone, and the 140 kilometer per hour speed zone is just 2 kilometers from the next speed limit, which is an increase back up to 200 kilometers per hour. The speed limit has now gone back up to 200 kilometers per hour. However, we're just 2.5 kilometers from the next speed limit, which is a reduction back to 160 kilometers per hour. Have now entered the 160 km per hour speed zone, and we've got just 1.3 kilometers to go until the next speed limit, which is an increase back to 200 kilometers per hour. Now approaching the next speed limit, which is a reduction back down to 140 kilometers per hour, and as you can see, the train is braking for that now. We're now passing Beinenbüttel station, and the speed limit is now 140 kilometers per hour. At the next speed change coming up shortly, the speed limit will be increasing once again to 200 kilometers per hour. And at the point where the speed limit increases, we've got 19.3 kilometers to go to our next stop. As you can see, the speed limit has now increased, which means we've now got probably less than 19 kilometers to go to our next stop. The next speed reduction will be a speed drop down to 160 kilometers per hour. The train is now braking for the 160 km per hour speed limit. Once we reach the 160 km per hour speed board, we will then have 2.6 kilometers to go to the next speed limit, which will be a reduction to 140 kilometers per hour. Apologies for my slight pause there, I just forgot what I was saying, lost track of it for a brief moment. So now we've passed the 160 km per hour speed board. We're now getting close to the speed reduction to 140 kilometers per hour. Once we reach the 140 km per hour speed board, we will then have 12.5 kilometers to go to our stop. Now passing through Bad Winsen station. We've now entered the 140 km per hour speed zone, meaning we've got just 12.5 kilometers to go. The next speed change will be an increase in speed limit to 200 kilometers per hour. However, that speed board will be just 1.8 kilometers from a speed reduction back down to 140 kilometers per hour. Therefore, we'll be lucky if we reach 160 before the train has to slow down again. Train is now braking for the 140 km/h speed limit coming up. Once we reach the 140 km/h speed board, we will then have just 6.3 kilometers to go to our stop. The next speed change will be an increase in speed to 160 km/h, and that will happen just 2.1 kilometers from the next speed reduction, which will be down to 130 km/h. So once again, we probably won't get to the speed limit before we have to brake for our stop. Just to correct what I just said there, I meant we won't be able to get to the speed limit before we have to brake for the next speed reduction. In fact, our stop will be 2.15 kilometers from the warning board for the 130 km/h speed limit. As you can see, the speed limit has now increased to 160 km/h. As I've already mentioned, we will shortly be dropping again down to 130 km/h. So the next landmark to look out for is the orange warning board, which we're just approaching now, just past it, which means we're now around 2 kilometers from our stop. The train is now braking towards the 130 km/h speed limit, and we're going to brake on the next point coming up. I've now made a step 4 brake application, which should bring our speed off nicely, as we are now approaching our stop at Uelzen. As you can see, I've just been fanning the brakes, moving them up and down a little bit to try and ensure that I've got around the right brake force to stop here. I have slowed down slightly too much once again, so now we're just going to gradually glide into the station. Here at Uelzen, we're going to try and stop at the second overhead wire gantry from the end of the platform, which looked about the right braking and stopping point to me. So at the next overhead gantry you can see just coming up, I'm going to try and stop by there. Departing from Uelzen, the starting speed limit is 130 km/h, and we've got around 52.5 kilometers to go to the next stop, which is Celle. The speed limit will shortly be increasing to 160 km/h, and then shortly after that, 1.3 kilometers away, the speed limit will increase again to 200 km/h. Speed limit has now gone up to 200 kilometers per hour. However, we're just 2.6 kilometers away from the next speed reduction, back down to 160 kilometers per hour. Now that we're at 160 kilometers per hour, we're just 1.3 kilometers from the next speed limit, which is an increase back to 200 kilometers per hour. Now got around 8 kilometers or 5 miles to go to the next speed limit, which is a reduction back down to 160 kilometers per hour. We're now approaching Luneburg station. The train is now braking for the upcoming 160 km per hour speed limit. Once we enter the 160 km per hour speed zone, we've then got just 0.9 kilometers to go to the next speed limit, which is an increase back to 200 kilometers per hour. Speed limit is now going back up to 200 kilometers per hour. However, we've got just 1.7 kilometers to go to the next speed change, which is a reduction back to 160 kilometers per hour. We're now passing Unterlüß. The speed limit will shortly be increasing to 200 kilometers per hour, which it just has done now. However, the 200 kilometer per hour limit is just 2.1 kilometers from a reduction back down to 160 kilometers per hour. Just trying to explain a little bit of how German signalling systems work if we happened to be on the PZB system, not the LZB system that we're currently on. When you see the diagonally facing signals, which are the distance or warning signals, if you see one that has two yellow lights on it, as we were passing them, they've all had two green lights on them. But if you saw one that had two yellow lights on them, that would be warning you that the next signal coming up is displaying a red aspect. So what you would have to do, as you pass the signal, you would have to press the page down key to acknowledge that you're aware that the signal is not clear, and at that point you would have just 23 seconds to bring your speed down from up to 160 kilometers per hour, which is the fastest speed on the PZB system. So you'd have 23 seconds to bring it from that speed to below 85 kilometers per hour. If you didn't slow down quick enough, the emergency brakes would be applied. Once you're doing 85 kilometers per hour, you need to look out and see if you can see the aspect of the signal ahead. If you can't, you would need to slow down further to below 65 kilometers per hour before you reach the next track magnet. If you didn't slow down to 65 kilometers per hour in time, the emergency brakes would be applied. If you can see that the signal is clear, however, you can press the end button to release you from monitoring. It's the PZB release button as it's known, and then you could accelerate back up to line speed. If the signal isn't clear and you've slowed down to 45 kilometers per hour in time, 65 kilometers per hour in time I meant, then you would need to brake further at that point to stop for the red signal. These rules are for passenger trains. In fact, the speed rules and distances vary quite considerably between the two. So you would pass the middle track magnet, at which you would be doing 65 kilometers per hour. Then you would have just 153 meters to slow to below 45 kilometers per hour before the red signal. And then it's up to your discretion to bring the train to a halt at the red signal. So as you can see, we just had a fairly long section at 200 kilometers per hour, and the train is now braking for the 160 kilometer per hour speed limit just coming up. So the main thing to remember with German signalling is the speed limits when approaching a red signal and the buttons to press. So it's page down to acknowledge any signal alarm, end to release yourself from monitoring only if the signal is clear and you have not passed what's known as the 500 Hz magnet. And then if you got to a red signal and stopped, and then you press the tab button and obtain permission to proceed, you would then use the delete key, which would override the PZB system and allow you to pass a signal at danger. At that point you would have to proceed at 40 kilometers per hour for 2 kilometers, or until you pass the next clear signal, whichever is closer. We're just passing through Eschede station now, and the speed limit has gone back up to 200 kilometers per hour. Just south of the station at the next overbridge on the 3rd of June 1998 was the site of one of the world's worst train crashes, and certainly the worst train crash that I know of in German history. At 10:59 in the morning, a northbound Intercity Express train had a wheel failure where the outer rim of the wheel tyre on one of the wheels in the coaches fractured and went up through the floor of the train. This stayed in the floor and the train continued for another 2 or 3 minutes without stopping. At this point, the wheel tyre that was sticking out the bottom of the carriage lifted up a check rail from a point just before the signal. and this caused the point to change, ultimately derailing the train, and the train smashed into a bridge, causing the bridge to collapse on top of it. Out of 287 passengers, 101 died and 88 were injured. There is actually a memorial garden in real life at Ashausen for the victims of the train crash, and that memorial has actually been added in Train Simulator as well, as a mark of respect for the victims of the crash. You can see that on the distance measuring equipment, it says 9,900, which means we're over 9.9 kilometres from the next speed change, which is why it's not active. The yellow bar won't move down, and the numbers at the top aren't changing. The next beep that we will hear in the cab will be the signalling system letting us know that the next speed limit is within 9.9 kilometres. Just had the beep now, so we now know that the next speed limit is within 9.9 kilometres, and in fact the next speed change is a reduction in speed to 150 kilometres per hour, and that speed limit is 2.4 kilometres from our stop at Celle. My explanation of the signalling system, I hope that I've helped you understand it a little better. I don't think I probably explained it as well as I could have. I jumbled up the words slightly. However, please don't forget that I am going to make a comprehensive tutorial demonstrating the German signalling system and different scenarios and how you would react to them and what you would do when approaching the red signal. So that should hopefully be coming up over the next week. I am going away for a couple of days from Monday, so after I'm back from being away, I'll then get to work on trying to get this tutorial done. I had already been working on it before I did this route learning video. I just encountered a few problems, which means it's going to take longer than I originally thought to make the tutorial. I would just like to take the opportunity at this point to remind you that you can find me on Facebook under PTG Rail. The link for that will be in the description of this video. In addition to that, if you really do appreciate my work and would like to become a patron of this channel, then please don't hesitate to visit my Patreon page. Again, the link for this will be put in the description of this video. And Patreon, what it allows you to do, if you really appreciate the work that someone does on YouTube and would like to support them financially, it allows you to make a monthly contribution towards what your favourite content creators are doing. So in this case, you would be able to make a monthly contribution towards the work that I do, as there is an awful lot of work that goes into making these videos. Of course, I will always keep all of these videos free, so it's entirely optional to do that. I'm currently looking to try and raise money to help me purchase more DLC to enable me to make a wider range of videos. And I'm also looking to get a new PC and a new headset and microphone to improve the quality of the videos which I'm making. The train is now braking for the 150 km/h speed limit. As I mentioned, when we enter the when we pass the speedboard and enter the speed zone, we will then be 2.4 km from Celle. So once we have passed the 150 km/h speedboard, which should be coming up now, we've just passed it, I'm going to idle the power at the next overbridge and allow the train to continue to coast towards our stop. The power is now idle, so I'm just allowing the train to continue to coast, and I'm going to brake as we reach this building on the right, just coming up. I have now made a step 4 brake application, which should bring our speed off quite nicely, as we are coming towards the station, which is coming up just ahead. here at Celle, I'm going to aim to stop by these glass waiting rooms you can see just here on the right. Departing Celle, the starting speed limit is 150 kilometers per hour, and we've got just over 41 kilometers to go to our final stop, which is Hanover. The next speed change will be an increase in the speed limit to 200 kilometers per hour. The speed limit has now increased to 200 kilometers per hour. As you can see, once again, the distance indicator is not currently active because it's showing 9,900 meters. So the distance to the next speed change is beyond 9.9 kilometers away. So the beep that we just heard in the cam once again is the distance indicator letting us know that the next speed limit is now within 9.9 kilometres. We're now approaching Grossberg-Wedel station. The train will shortly start to brake for the next speed limit, which is a drop in speed to 160 km per hour. Once we reach the 160 km per hour speed zone, we will then be 19.5 kilometres from our stop at Hanover. Once again, the next speed change is more than 9.9 kilometres away, so once again the distance indicator is not active, and the next beep that we should hear in the cab will be the distance indicator becoming active once again as we get closer to the next speed change. We're now approaching Issenhern station. Sorry, not Issenhern, I'll correct that. We're now approaching Issenhagen station. The distance indicator is now letting us know that the next speed change, which will be a drop to 110 kilometers per hour, is less than 9.9 kilometers away. passing through Langenhagen Fördermarkt station. So it's Langenhagen Fördermarkt, I believe. Passing through Langenhagen Mitte station. Now passing Winhorst. As you can see, the train is now starting to slow down for the upcoming 110 km/h speed limit. Shortly after the speed limit begins, we will actually be leaving the LZB signalling system and re-entering the PZB signalling system. We're now passing Luneburg. We have now entered the 110 km/h speed zone. And we will shortly get a warning. You can now see it, the yellow light that's come on the dashboard, indicating us that the LZB is about to end. And in fact the yellow light says the word end on it in black writing. So what I do as we end the LZB system is I idle the power to allow the train to coast. Because if you remember, when we entered the LZB, I moved the speed set lever to the highest setting. We've now entered the PZB system again, and so if I hadn't have reduced the throttle first, the train would have immediately tried to accelerate up to 300 km/h. So now I've reduced the speed set to 110 km/h, now that the LZB has ended, and increased the power once again, and so now we're manually controlling our speed. Very shortly we will get a signal with a speed warning on it of a reduction to 40 km/h. So once we reach that signal and the alarm goes off, I will press page down to acknowledge the alarm, and then I've got to brake to 40 km/h by the time we reach the next signal. So as you can see, the signal we just had a flashing green aspect on it. I pressed page down to acknowledge immediately, and now I'm slowing straight down towards 40 km/h. I know if you don't slow down quick enough, the emergency brakes will apply, so I like to ensure that I've slowed down quick enough, as I certainly don't want an emergency brake application to happen. So I may have slowed down slightly too early, but I'd rather slow down too early than have the emergency brakes applied. I've now reduced the speed set to 40 kilometers per hour, and I'm now going to increase the power to maintain us at that speed. See, we're now passing a green signal with the number 4 above it, indicating that we are now operating under a 40 km per hour signal speed limit. As you can see, we are now approaching Hanover station. So I'm now going to idle the power and gradually bring our speed down. The platform here is a very long platform, so trying to work out the braking point was a bit of a challenge. But I believe that if you see the letters on the right, on the blue signs, we've just passed F, and then shortly we're going to be passing E. I'm going to aim to stop just around the D sign coming up. Here we are, arrival at Hanover. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you've enjoyed the video.